The sound of my body hitting the marble steps still echoes in my nightmares. One moment I was standing there, 7 months pregnant and trying to explain myself. The next, I was tumbling down 3 stone steps while 200 guests watched in stunned silence. The pain that shot through my belly made me scream, but what happened in the next 60 seconds would expose a truth so shocking that it would destroy one of the most powerful families in the country forever. This is my story, and I promise you've never heard anything like it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Emma, and 6 months ago, I thought I knew exactly who I was. I worked as a night shift cleaner at Grandview Medical Center, one of those jobs that keeps the world running while everyone else sleeps. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and it helped me save every penny I could for my baby. At 7 months pregnant and completely alone, every dollar mattered more than you could imagine. The father? He disappeared the moment I told him about the pregnancy. Just packed his things one Tuesday morning and left a note saying he wasn't ready for this kind of responsibility. I cried for exactly 1 day, then decided I was going to be the best single mother this baby could ask for. I had my small apartment, my steady job, and a determination that could move mountains. That's all I thought I needed. But life has a way of testing us when we least expect it. That Tuesday night started like any other. I arrived at the medical center at 11 p.m., ready for another 8-hour shift of mopping floors, emptying trash cans, and disinfecting rooms. The work was getting harder as my pregnancy progressed, but I needed every hour I could get. Maternity leave was coming whether I was ready or not, and I had to save enough to survive those months without income. Dr. Harrison was working late again, as he often did. He was the kind of doctor who truly cared about his patients, staying long past his shifts to make sure everyone received the best care possible. We'd developed a friendly relationship over the months I'd been working there. He always asked about my pregnancy, how I was feeling, if I needed anything. His kindness meant more to me than he probably realized. That night, something was different. Dr. Harrison seemed distracted, worried about something. When I entered his office to empty the wastebasket, he looked up from his desk with tired eyes and managed a weak smile. "Emma?" he said, his voice heavy with concern. "I need to tell you something important. Can you sit down for a moment?" My heart immediately started racing. In my experience, when someone asks you to sit down before telling you something important, it's never good news. I lowered myself carefully into the chair across from his desk, my hand instinctively moving to my belly to comfort my unborn child. "What is it, Dr. Harrison?" I asked, trying to keep the worry out of my voice. He took a deep breath and pulled out a folder from his desk drawer. "Emma," he said slowly, "do you remember when you came in for your emergency room visit 3 months ago? When you fainted at work and we ran those blood tests?" I nodded, remembering that scary night when I'd collapsed during my shift. They'd run numerous tests to make sure both the baby and I were healthy. "Well," he continued, "we ran a comprehensive blood panel that included genetic markers. It's routine for pregnant women, helps us identify any potential complications. But your results showed something unexpected, something that I've been wrestling with how to tell you." He opened the folder and showed me a document filled with medical terminology I couldn't understand. "Your blood work revealed some very unusual genetic markers," he explained. "Markers that suggest a very specific lineage. Emma, based on these results and some additional research I've conducted, I believe you may be the biological daughter of someone very prominent in this city." I stared at him in complete confusion. "Dr. Harrison, I don't understand. I know who my parents are. My mother died when I was 16, and I never knew my father. She always told me he was just someone she met briefly, someone who wasn't part of our lives. I've never had any family beyond her." "That's what makes this so difficult," he said gently. "The genetic markers in your blood match a very specific profile, one that suggests your father is actually Vincent Ashworth. Emma, Vincent Ashworth is one of the wealthiest men in the state. He owns half the businesses in this city, including the chain of hospitals that includes this medical center." The room started spinning around me. Vincent Ashworth? I'd heard that name countless times. His face was on billboards, in newspapers, on the news. He was practically royalty in our city. The kind of man who lived in a world so far removed from mine that we might as well have been from different planets. "You're telling me that man is my father?" I whispered. Dr. Harrison nodded gravely. "The genetic evidence is overwhelming, Emma, but here's what makes this situation even more complex. Vincent Ashworth has been married to the same woman, Victoria Ashworth, for over 30 years. They're considered the perfect power couple, the golden family of our city. If this information became public, it would not only prove that he had an affair, but it would also mean you're entitled to a significant portion of his estate. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I couldn't process what he was telling me. My entire life I believed I was nobody special, just a girl whose mother had made one mistake that resulted in my birth. Now I was being told that my father was one of the most powerful men in the country, and I potentially had rights to wealth beyond my imagination. But more than the money, I was struggling with the emotional impact. I had a father, I had a family. I wasn't alone in the world like I'd always believed. But Dr. Harrison wasn't finished. "Emma," he said, his voice becoming even more serious, "there's something else you need to know. Victoria Ashworth has a reputation in this city. She's known for being ruthless when it comes to protecting her family's image and fortune. If she ever discovered your existence, I believe she would do everything in her power to eliminate any threat you might pose to her position." "What do you mean, eliminate?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. Dr. Harrison's expression was grave, as he explained that Victoria Ashworth had been involved in several legal battles over the years, all involving people who had tried to make claims against the family fortune. These people had either been discredited, disappeared from the city entirely, or in some cases had met with unfortunate accidents. "I'm not trying to scare you, Emma," he continued, "but I think you deserve to know what kind of people you're dealing with. Vincent Ashworth might be your biological father, but Victoria Ashworth sees threats everywhere, and she eliminates them without hesitation. If you ever decide to pursue this connection, you need to be extremely careful." That night, I went home to my small apartment and stared at the genetic test results until my eyes burned. I looked around at my modest life, at the second-hand crib I'd bought for my baby, at the stack of bills on my kitchen table, and tried to imagine a world where I was connected to the Ashworth empire. It seemed impossible, like a fairy tale that couldn't possibly be true. But as the days passed, I found myself researching Vincent Ashworth online. I studied his face in photographs, looking for any resemblance to my own features. I read articles about his business empire, his charitable contributions, his perfect marriage to Victoria. And slowly I began to see similarities. The shape of his eyes, the line of his jaw, even the way he smiled in photographs reminded me of my own reflection. More importantly, I started thinking about my baby. If Vincent Ashworth was truly my father, then my child was his grandchild. My child was entitled to opportunities, to education, to a life free from the financial struggles I'd always known. Didn't my baby deserve to know about this family connection? Didn't I have an obligation to at least try to establish contact? After 2 weeks of internal debate, I made the decision that would change everything. I called the Ashworth estate and requested a meeting with Vincent Ashworth. I didn't explain why I wanted to see him, just said it was a personal matter of extreme importance. To my surprise, his assistant scheduled an appointment for the following Saturday afternoon. The Ashworth estate was like something from a movie. Rolling lawns, a mansion that looked more like a palace, and security guards who watched my beat-up car with obvious suspicion as I drove through the gates. I dressed in my best outfit, which admittedly wasn't much, and I carried Dr. Harrison's genetic test results in a folder clutched tightly in my hands. Vincent Ashworth met me in his study, a room filled with leather-bound books and expensive art. He was exactly as I'd seen him in photographs, distinguished and powerful. But there was something warm in his eyes when he looked at me, something that made me believe, even before I showed him the test results, that he somehow already knew why I was there. "Miss Thompson," he said, gesturing for me to sit in a chair across from his massive desk, "my assistant mentioned you had something important to discuss. How can I help you?" I took a deep breath and handed him the folder. "Mr. Ashworth," I began, my voice shaking slightly, "I believe you're my father." The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Vincent Ashworth opened the folder and studied the genetic test results, his expression becoming more serious with each page he read. Finally, He looked up at me with eyes that were suddenly filled with tears. "Emma," he whispered, and hearing my name spoken in his voice sent chills down my spine. "I've been wondering about you for 25 years, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Your mother, Sarah Thompson. I met her at a conference in Chicago. We had a brief relationship during a difficult time in my marriage, and when she disappeared, I always wondered if there might have been consequences. I hired investigators to try to find her, but she'd changed her name, moved states. I never stopped looking for her, Emma. I never stopped hoping I might find you." The conversation that followed was surreal. Vincent Ashworth told me about his relationship with my mother, how he'd fallen in love with her during a time when his marriage to Victoria was going through a rough patch. He explained that he'd wanted to leave Victoria and start a new life with my mother, but she'd disappeared before he could make that decision. He spent the last 25 years regretting not trying harder to find her, not knowing that she died when I was just 16, not knowing that I'd been struggling alone all these years. The genetic test results confirmed what his heart had already told him the moment I walked into his study. I was his daughter, and my unborn baby was his first grandchild. But then came the complication that would lead to the most terrifying moment of my life. Vincent explained that Victoria knew nothing about my mother or about the possibility of his having another child. Their marriage had survived that difficult period, and they'd built what appeared to be a strong partnership over the years. But Victoria was extremely protective of the family image and fortune. "Emma," he said, his voice filled with concern, "I want more than anything to have you as part of my life, to be a grandfather to your baby. But Victoria cannot know about this, at least not yet. She needs time to adjust to the idea, and I need to find the right way to tell her. Can you give me some time to figure out how to handle this situation?" I agreed, of course. I was overwhelmed by everything I'd learned, and the idea of suddenly being thrust into the spotlight of the Ashworth family seemed terrifying. We arranged to meet regularly in secret, while Vincent figured out how to break the news to his wife. He insisted on helping me financially, setting up a discreet account to ensure I could stop working and focus on my pregnancy. For 6 weeks, I experienced what it felt like to have a father. Vincent and I met twice a week at various locations around the city, always careful to avoid being seen together. He was everything I'd always dreamed a father might be. Interested in my life, concerned about my health, excited about his grandchild. He bought books about pregnancy and parenting, asked endless questions about how I was feeling, and even started talking about setting up a nursery in his home. But our secret couldn't last forever. Victoria Ashworth was not a woman who missed details, and she began noticing changes in her husband's behavior. He was happier, more energetic, but also more secretive. He was making unexplained trips out of the house and receiving phone calls he wouldn't discuss. Her suspicions grew until she finally decided to have him followed. The confrontation happened on a Saturday afternoon when Vincent and I were meeting at a small cafe downtown. We'd been discussing plans for after the baby was born, talking about how he might gradually introduce me to the rest of the family. That's when Victoria Ashworth walked into the cafe with 2 security guards flanking her sides. I'd never seen her in person before, but I recognized her immediately from the society pages. She was a striking woman in her early 50s. Perfectly dressed and radiating the kind of cold authority that comes from decades of wealth and power. Her eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my blood freeze. Vincent saw her at the same moment I did, and the color drained from his face. "Victoria," he started to say, but she held up her hand to silence him. She walked directly to our table, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor like a countdown timer. "So this is her," Victoria said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "This is the little gold digger who thinks she can destroy my family." I tried to speak, to explain the situation, but she wasn't interested in explanations. "Vincent," she continued, not taking her eyes off me, "we're leaving. Now." Vincent looked torn between his wife and his daughter, between his old life and the new relationship he'd been building with me. "Victoria," he said quietly, "this isn't what you think. This is Emma. She's my daughter. The genetic tests prove it. She's carrying my grandchild." Victoria's laugh was cold and bitter. "Your daughter? Vincent, don't be naive. This girl has obviously researched our family and fabricated these test results to try to get money from us. Do you really think some random cleaning woman could be related to us? Look at her, Vincent. Look at where she comes from." The insult stung, but what happened next was so much worse. Victoria turned her full attention to me, and I saw something in her eyes that terrified me. Pure hatred, the kind of malice that comes from someone who sees you as nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. "You have exactly 24 hours to disappear from this city," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "If I ever see you again, if you ever try to contact my husband again, if you ever mention the Ashworth name in connection with your pathetic life, I will make sure you regret it in ways you can't imagine. Do you understand me?" I was 7 months pregnant, exhausted from the emotional stress of the afternoon, and completely intimidated by this woman who clearly had the power to destroy my life with a phone call. But I also thought about my unborn baby, about the father I'd just found, about the family connection that could change everything for us. "Mrs. Ashworth," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I'm not trying to hurt your family. I just want my baby to know their grandfather. The genetic tests are real. Dr. Harrison at Grandview Medical Center can verify everything. I'm not asking for money or trying to cause problems. I just want to be part of the family." That's when Victoria Ashworth made the decision that would expose her true nature to the world. She stepped closer to me, close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume, and spoke in a voice so quiet that only I could hear her words. "You want to be part of my family?" she whispered. "Let me show you exactly what happens to people who threaten what's mine." What happened next unfolded so quickly that my mind struggled to process it. Victoria Ashworth's perfectly manicured hand shot out and shoved me backward, with a force I never expected from someone her size. I was already off balance from my pregnancy, and the unexpected push sent me stumbling toward the cafe's entrance, where 3 marble steps led down to the sidewalk. Time seemed to slow as I felt myself falling. My hands instinctively moved to protect my belly as I tumbled down those stone steps, each impact sending shockwaves of pain through my body. The sound of my head hitting the bottom step echoed through the afternoon air, and I felt warm blood begin to trickle from a cut above my eyebrow. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the terror I felt for my unborn baby. The cafe had been busy with the usual Saturday afternoon crowd, and suddenly dozens of people were gathering around me. I could hear voices, some shocked, some angry, some calling for help. But through it all, I heard Victoria Ashworth's voice, cold and calculating as she began to spin her version of events. "This woman has been stalking my husband," she announced to the growing crowd. "She's been making wild claims about being related to our family, trying to extort money from us." When we confronted her about her lies, she became hysterical and fell down the steps. "Someone needs to call security before she hurts herself further." I tried to sit up, tried to speak, but the fall had left me dazed and struggling to catch my breath. My pregnancy made it difficult to move quickly, and I could feel something wet soaking through my dress. Whether it was blood from my head wound or something more serious, I couldn't tell, but panic was setting in. Vincent was immediately at my side, his face pale with horror at what his wife had just done. "Emma, don't move," he said, his voice shaking. "Someone call an ambulance. She needs medical attention immediately." He turned to face his wife, and I'd never seen such fury in someone's eyes. "Victoria, what have you done? She's pregnant. She's carrying my grandchild." But Victoria wasn't finished with her performance. "Vincent, this woman is obviously disturbed," she said, her voice carrying just the right amount of concern to sound believable. "She's been following us, making up stories about genetic tests and family connections." I was simply trying to get her to leave us alone when she became violent and unstable. That's when someone in the crowd spoke up, and everything changed. "I saw what happened," said a young woman with her phone already out, recording everything. "That lady in the expensive dress pushed the pregnant woman down the steps. I got it all on video." Victoria's composure cracked for just a moment, but she quickly recovered. "You're mistaken," she said smoothly. "This woman fell because she was behaving erratically. We're the victims here, being harassed by someone who clearly needs psychological help." More voices joined in from the crowd. Several people had witnessed Victoria's deliberate push, and they weren't going to let her rewrite what had just happened. The young woman with the phone was already uploading the video to social media, and others were taking pictures of the scene. The ambulance arrived within minutes, and as the paramedics began checking my vital signs and the baby's heartbeat, I heard one of them radio to the hospital. "We have a pregnant female, approximately 7 months gestation, who's taken a fall down stone steps. Possible head injury, patient is conscious but disoriented. We're also seeing some signs that could indicate premature labor." Those words sent ice through my veins. premature labor. My baby wasn't due for another 2 months. If something happened to my child, because of Victoria Ashworth's cruelty, I would never forgive myself for putting us in this situation. As they loaded me into the ambulance, Vincent climbed in beside me, despite his wife's protests. "I'm not leaving her," he told the paramedics. "This is my daughter, and that's my grandchild. I'm coming with you." Victoria's face went white at his public declaration, but there was nothing she could do to stop him without creating an even bigger scene. The ride to Grandview Medical Center felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. The paramedics were monitoring both my vital signs and the baby's, and I could see concern in their expressions even though they tried to remain reassuring. Vincent held my hand the entire way, apologizing over and over for what his wife had done. "Emma, I had no idea she was capable of something like this," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I thought I could handle the situation gradually, bring her around to accepting you. I never imagined she would hurt you, especially knowing you're carrying my grandchild." Dr. Harrison was waiting for us when we arrived at the hospital, having been called by the ambulance crew. His face was grim as he supervised my transfer to the labor and delivery unit. After a thorough examination, he delivered news that was both terrifying and hopeful. "Emma, the fall has triggered some early contractions, but we've managed to stop them with medication," he explained. "The baby's heartbeat is strong, and there don't appear to be any immediate complications. However, you're going to need complete bed rest for the remainder of your pregnancy, and we'll need to monitor you closely for any signs of premature labor." The relief I felt was overwhelming, but it was mixed with anger at Victoria Ashworth for putting my baby's life at risk. As Dr. Harrison continued his examination, Vincent stepped out into the hallway to make some phone calls. I could hear his raised voice through the door as he spoke with someone, his tone angrier than I'd ever heard it. When he returned, his expression was determined. "Emma, I've just spoken with my attorney," he said. "We're filing assault charges against Victoria, and I'm also filing for divorce. What she did today was unforgivable, and I won't spend another day married to someone capable of such cruelty." The next few hours brought developments I never could have anticipated. The video of Victoria pushing me down the steps had gone viral on social media, shared thousands of times with comments expressing outrage at her behavior. News outlets had picked up the story, and reporters were already gathering outside the hospital. But the most shocking development came when Vincent's attorney arrived with documents that would change everything. "Mr. Ashworth," the lawyer said, "I've been doing research into your wife's background, particularly her history with previous threats to the family fortune. What I've discovered is deeply troubling." He spread several files across the hospital room table. Vincent's face went pale as he studied the documents. "Are you saying my wife is responsible for people's deaths?" "I'm saying the pattern is too consistent to be coincidental," the attorney replied. "And there's more. Victoria has been embezzling money from the Ashworth Foundation for years, using it to pay off threats and fund her elimination campaigns. We're talking about millions of dollars in stolen charity funds." The revelation was staggering. The woman I'd encountered wasn't just cruel and entitled. She was a criminal who had been covering her tracks for decades. The push down the steps wasn't an isolated incident of cruelty. It was part of a pattern of violence designed to protect her position and wealth. As if summoned by our conversation, Victoria Ashworth appeared in the doorway of my hospital room, flanked by 2 security guards and her own attorney. She'd clearly come prepared for a fight, but the confident mask she'd worn earlier was beginning to slip. "Vincent, this has gone far enough," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "This woman is trying to destroy our family with her lies and manipulations. I demand that you stop entertaining her fantasies and come home with me immediately." Vincent stood up slowly, and when he spoke, his voice carried an authority I'd never heard before. "Victoria, you're going to leave this hospital immediately, and you're never going to come near my daughter or grandchild again. I know what you've done, not just today but for the past 20 years. The embezzlement, the threats, the people who've disappeared. It's over." Victoria's composure finally cracked completely. "You have no proof of anything," she snarled. "And even if you did, no one would believe that I'm capable of what you're suggesting. I'm Victoria Ashworth. I'm respected in this community." That's when Dr. Harrison stepped forward with something that would seal Victoria's fate. "Mrs. Ashworth," he said quietly, I've been documenting your threats against patients and their families for years. When Emma first came to me with her genetic test results, I started keeping detailed records of everything, including our conversations about your reputation for eliminating threats." He pulled out a small recording device. "I also recorded our conversation today when you called the hospital making threats against Emma and demanding that I falsify medical records to hide the genetic test results. Making threats against patients and attempting to manipulate medical records are both felony charges." The blood drained from Victoria's face as she realized the extent of evidence that had been gathered against her. The video of her pushing me down the steps, the financial records showing years of embezzlement, the documented threats against multiple people, and now recorded evidence of her attempting to cover up crimes. But Victoria Ashworth hadn't built her empire by giving up easily. "None of this will hold up in court," she said, though her voice lacked its earlier confidence. "I have the best lawyers in the state. And I know judges who owe me favors. This pregnant nobody and her lies won't destroy what I've built." That's when Vincent delivered the blow that would end her reign of terror forever. "Victoria, I've already transferred control of all Ashworth assets to an independent trust," he said calmly. "You no longer have access to the money you've been using to buy silence and eliminate threats. Your accounts have been frozen pending investigation of the embezzlement charges." The transformation in Victoria's demeanor was instant and complete. The polished, controlled woman who had walked into the hospital was replaced by someone desperate and dangerous. "You can't do this to me," she screamed, her voice echoing through the hospital corridor. "I built this empire with you. I deserve half of everything we have." "You deserve exactly what you're going to get," Vincent replied. "A prison sentence for assault, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The evidence against you is overwhelming, Victoria. It's over." Security guards escorted Victoria from the hospital as she continued screaming threats and accusations. The last thing I heard her say was, "This isn't finished. That baby will never be safe as long as I'm alive." The threat sent chills through everyone in the room, but Vincent's attorney was already taking notes. "That constitutes terroristic threatening," he said. "We'll add it to the charges." Quote, "Over the next week, as I remained in the hospital on bed rest, the story dominated local and national news. The video of Victoria pushing a pregnant woman down marble steps had been viewed millions of times, and public outrage was overwhelming. The subsequent revelations about her years of criminal activity only added fuel to the fire. Vincent visited me every day, bringing flowers, books, and updates on the legal proceedings. He'd also been meeting with interior designers, preparing a nursery in his home for when the baby arrived. "Emma, I know I can't make up for the 25 years we lost," he said during one visit. "But I want to be the best father and grandfather I can be for whatever time we have left." The transformation in my life was surreal. 1 month earlier, I'd been a struggling single mother working night shifts to save money for my baby. Now I was the daughter of one of the wealthiest men in the country, with access to the best medical care, the finest education for my child, and a future free from financial worry. But more important than the money was the family I'd gained. Vincent introduced me to his parents, my grandparents, who welcomed me with tears of joy. They'd known about the affair years earlier and had always hoped Vincent would find a way to locate my mother and any potential children. The trial of Victoria Ashworth became one of the most watched legal proceedings in the state's history. The evidence against her was overwhelming, from the viral video of the assault to financial records showing decades of embezzlement and documented threats against multiple victims. Several women came forward during the trial, finally feeling safe enough to testify about the payments and threats they'd received from Victoria over the years. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Victoria Ashworth was sentenced to 25 years in prison for assault, embezzlement, conspiracy, and terroristic threatening. The judge's comments during sentencing reflected the public's outrage at her crimes. "Mrs. Ashworth, you used your wealth and position to terrorize innocent people for decades," the judge said. "Your assault on a pregnant woman, motivated purely by greed and a desire to maintain power, represents the worst kind of privilege abuse our society can produce. My daughter was born 6 weeks later, healthy and perfect, despite the trauma of her early months. Vincent was in the delivery room when she took her first breath, and the tears of joy on his face told me everything I needed to know about the kind of grandfather he would be. We named her Hope because she represented a new beginning for our family, a chance to build something beautiful from the ashes of Victoria's cruelty. Vincent held his granddaughter for the first time with shaking hands, whispering promises about the love and opportunities he would provide for her. Today, 6 months later, Hope and I live in a wing of the Ashworth estate that Vincent designed specifically for us. It's still surreal sometimes, waking up in a room larger than my old apartment, knowing that my daughter will grow up with every advantage I never had. But the greatest gift hasn't been the money or the mansion. It's been having a father who loves me unconditionally, who spent months making up for lost time, by learning everything about my life, my dreams, my fears. He's become the parent I always imagined but never thought I'd have. Vincent established the Emma Thompson Foundation in my honor, providing support for single mothers facing financial hardship. We've already helped dozens of women access health care, education, and job training. Turning our painful experience into something that helps others has been incredibly healing. The foundation also works to expose and prosecute predators who use wealth and power to silence victims. Victoria Ashworth's case opened floodgates, with dozens of similar cases being investigated across the country. Powerful people who thought they were untouchable are finally being held accountable for their crimes. I often think about that Tuesday night when Dr. Harrison first told me about the genetic test results. If I hadn't found the courage to contact Vincent, if I'd let fear keep me silent, Victoria would still be terrorizing innocent people and stealing from charities. Sometimes our most terrifying decisions lead to the most important changes. Hope is crawling now, exploring every corner of her grandfather's massive home with fearless curiosity. Vincent follows her around, baby-proofing furniture and marveling at every new development. He says she has my determination and his stubborn streak, which he considers a perfect combination. The woman who pushed me down those marble steps thought she was eliminating a threat to her empire. Instead, she exposed herself as the real threat and lost everything she'd spent decades building. Sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected places, delivered by the very people predators underestimate. Looking at my daughter playing in the sunlight streaming through windows of our new home, I'm reminded that cruelty and greed will always be defeated by love and courage. Victoria Ashworth spent years destroying lives to protect her position, but in the end, it was her own cruelty that brought her down. My story began with a woman pushing a pregnant girl down marble steps, but it ends with a family reunited, a criminal brought to justice, and a foundation that will help countless others find their own paths to safety and success. Sometimes the most beautiful endings grow from the most painful beginnings. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.